In the dawn of time, when the world was still young, there existed a realm where gods walked among men. Zeus, the god of gods, with his thunderbolts ruled the skies. Poseidon commanded the seas with a wave of his mighty trident. And Hades, the lord of the underworld, held dominion over the dead. In this world, the gods were no mere distant rulers. They were deeply entwined in the lives of mortals, driven by desires and emotions as complex and turbulent as those they watched over. This was the age of Greek mythology.
When I started this painting, it didn't even cross my mind once that I would ever need to unstretch this, let alone any of the other events that are about to unfold. But here we are. I guess life is full of surprises, and yeah, this is definitely a surprise and maybe one of the craziest painting journeys I've been on recently.
Initially, this painting was just supposed to be the main piece for my upcoming exhibition. Then you all decided that it was going to be the painting that showcases the modern portrait painter set. If you don't have it yet, head over to my website, grab it while you can. It's just limited edition. I'm gonna show you in this video what you can do with these colors and the color palette and how it translates into the painting. But then, as fate would have it, this turned into a whole nother thing. And yeah, most definitely not what I had in mind when I had the idea first. But yeah, we'll get there. One thing after another. Let's address the elephant in the room first. What am I painting here? Is this a goose or is this a swan? Because over the past few weeks, whenever I brought up this project and this painting that I'm working on, people keep correcting me. You know that this is a swan, right? I've had discussions about this, I've had even fights about this with friends and family. And yeah, I mean, probably yes, but I always thought that a goose and a swan are kind of the same thing at least. Like every swan is also a goose. I'll admit, I'm not 100% sure, I have no idea. I'm sure someone can help us out, any geese or swan experts out there can enlighten us in the comments down below. Either way though, whatever the answer might be, to me this is forever gonna be Goose Girl. I don't care if it's a swan, technically, whatever. In these kinds of cases, I like to handle it as Adam Savage from the Mythbusters, who used to say, I reject your reality and substitute my own. So, Goose Girl it is.
So interestingly, at the moment this looks very different from what I had in mind actually. Probably not that surprising. I mean, there is a lot that I haven't painted yet, and I have a feeling it's going to change dramatically once I do that. But I feel like there is already some quite interesting stuff happening here that I would like to point out. So if we're just looking at the skin, I think like you can start to feel the intensity, the luminosity, the vibrancy that I'm building up here. And this is really in large part because of the colors that I'm using for this. Of course, painting skin, as you would expect, is mostly mixing gray colors and putting them next to each other. That's really all it is. But if you get close to the painting and if you really start examining it, you can see that there is a lot more going on here. If you look at the shadow areas, for example, you can see that they are painted transparently. but they also look quite intense and rich and luminous. And that is really because I'm using transparent versions that are highly saturated of what you might typically see when you paint shadows. So in this case here, it's transparent oxide red, and sometimes it's a mixture between black transparent oxide red and even phthalo green. But in any case, it's a very intense version of what you would typically see. Then next to the shadows you can see a lot of neutral grays, painted less transparently, more opaque, so the light gets reflected in a different way, and this is really, of course, something that you can mix with any palette. Any earth-colored palette will do the trick here. But once we move on to the face and we take a closer look here, you can see all of this, but even exaggerated. You still have, of course, your transparent shadows, but especially in the highlights, you can start to see these exaggerated colors, like peachy yellows or rosy violets. And this is really only possible with using mixtures of highly intense colors. In this case here, it's cadmium yellow, but also permanent red violet. And then, of course, we got the cool blues that are a mixture of white and permanent red violet, but also very importantly, ultramarine blue. And again, the minty tones, the minty greens that, are all over the face basically. But all in all, this juxtaposition of putting different qualities of paint, but also more importantly, different intensities of paint next to each other. So very muted colors, but also highly saturated colors. Very transparent colors, but also colors that are highly opaque, that creates the illusion of vibrant, alive-looking flesh and skin. Now, this is still not exactly where I wanted to be. I was actually looking to go into a different direction color-wise with the skin. For whatever reason, this is what happened, but it's totally fine. I have a lot more that I need to finish and paint, and then we can come back and I can still push it in any direction really I want. So, let's continue.
So the inspiration for this painting here is, of course, Greek mythology. And I've been thinking about this painting for quite some time now, actually. I would say probably several years. I've just been waiting for the right time to finally bring it to life, and now's the time. The theme of Greek mythology, though, or mythology in general, is actually something that's been pretty much following me ever since I started making paintings. I don't think there is a single year where I haven't created something inspired by Eastern or Western mythology. And if I go back to some of my older paintings, some of the catalogs or booklets that I have from my exhibitions, you will always find one or several paintings inspired by mythology. I made a painting inspired by Psyche, probably one of my most time-consuming paintings back in the day, especially because of all the flowers on a blanket. I think back then when I counted them, it was something like over 1,000 flowers, these weird Takashi Murakami flowers that I needed to paint. I made a self-portrait as a Janus figure, like a two-headed Janus figure, also inspired by Greek mythology, in my Captain America shirt. I have made a painting inspired by Ariadne, a classic story from Greek mythology. And not only Greek mythology, but also Eastern mythology. I've made a painting inspired by Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, the Journey to the West. Luckily, now everybody knows who this is, thanks to, of course, the recent release of the game Black Myth Wukong. But mythology has been and still is a big source of inspiration for me. And that's probably not that surprising, considering that it's been a major source of inspiration for pretty much every artist that has ever lived ever since we started making art. There are so many fascinating, beautiful, inspiring stories and motifs that it's hardly surprising that people are still to this day captivated and inspired by them. Now, all that being said, I have to admit that the story that served as inspiration for this painting, the story of Leda and the Swan, is maybe not the most beautiful one. Which is maybe a bit surprising because pretty much every artist you can think of has created a work that's inspired by this story and this motif. The story of Leda and the Swan is, well, depending on how you look at it, maybe ugly, maybe sad, maybe tasteless, but also at the same time not very atypical when it comes to these stories. The mighty and all-powerful god Zeus comes down to earth, seduces XYZ, actually pretty much anyone and anything he can get his hands on, and yeah, things happen from there. In this particular story, the beautiful queen of Sparta, Leda, is resting at a river or sometimes bathing at a river when she has an encounter with Zeus, who is disguised as a swan. There are different versions of the story. Sometimes they fall in love, and you have a more positive, beautiful version of the story. Sometimes Leda gets seduced by the mighty, all-powerful god, and sometimes it's even less consensual. But the story in and of itself is actually not that interesting. But what is interesting is everything that follows from this encounter, because that is one of my absolute favorite things and some of the most beautiful stories ever told. So after her encounter with Zeus, Leda actually gives birth to several important figures in Greek mythology, including Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. In these stories, Helen's beauty is always somewhat legendary. She's just the most beautiful person you can imagine. And eventually, Helen ends up marrying the king of Sparta, Menelaus. But the thing that happens is that she and one of the princes of Troy, Paris, end up falling in love and, well, they run away together. And it's this event that's the spark for the infamous Trojan War. Because Menelaus and his brother Agamemnon, they rally against the Greek and they try to get Helen back. The Trojan War is told in the Iliad, and it has some of the most beautiful battles and storylines and encounters and twisted relationships that you can imagine. There are heroic feats, there are tragic fates, there is this beautiful encounter between Achilles and Hector, etc., etc. And eventually, of course, the fall of Troy, including the aftermath and, of course, the continuing story, the Odyssey, where Odysseus is struggling to get back home to Ithaca, etc., etc. If you've never heard of it, which I have a hard time imagining, but if you haven't, I highly recommend it. It's this epic journey filled with monsters, gods, and trials, and it connects the aftermath of the Trojan War to the broader Greek mythology. It's one of those stories really where in the end you feel like, I just want this to go on forever. Why can't every story be like this? And it's Leda's encounter with Zeus that sets the stage for all of these stories. Now this is the part of the video where I was going to talk a bit about how I'm going to proceed with the painting. How I painted the hand, how I love everything so far and I don't want to rush it, how I'm going to turn it into a second video, yada yada yada. All of that scrapped. Because the universe apparently had different plans for this painting. I'm actually not gonna finish this painting in the studio here. I'm actually gonna wrap it up. I'm gonna travel to another country. I'll be heading to France and I will be finishing the painting live in front of thousands of people, potentially at one of the biggest art fairs in the world, Art Basel Paris. Talk about Odysseys. I had absolutely no idea that this was gonna be the painting journey for this painting, but hey, life is always full of surprises, so I say, let's do it.